Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. It's about time to do something I never really thought I would say, folks. Newsflash, probably just about the only outlet out there today still riding with Biden. We'll tell you why and really go through some of the crazy media attacks that have been going on against him. There's been some crazy ones, for example, in the Atlantic magazine. That's been a big subject, a big area of attack. A pro-Biden outlet that has really turned on him over the last couple of days over this Afghanistan business. New York Times, though, not holding back. Biden ran on competence and empathy. Afghanistan is testing that. The idea that, of course, if you stayed in Afghanistan for even longer, that would have been the more empathetic thing to do. Peter Baker making that case in the New York Times, again, which holds itself to the highest standards of objectivity, not editorializing on anything here. Speaking of which, Mike Prysner is going to editorialize in Jacobin about the Afghanistan war, talking about what the military-industrial complex gained by staying in Afghanistan for so long, a really important piece of the coverage that is just not being obviously picked up by the awful coverage in mainstream media. Also, the U.S. Appeals Court refuses to end the CDC's eviction moratorium, and we'll take a look at some of the media's best reactions following some of what we've seen in Kabul. All right, let's get started. It's Newsflash. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go right to it. So, for most of the last week, fires in the worst foreign policy crisis, in his young administration, the president who won the White House on a promise of competence and compassion had trouble demonstrating much of either. This is Peter Baker, again, in the New York Times. This is a very significant deal, because you see something like Tom Nichols or some other crazy, pro-war psychopath writing in The Atlantic. The Atlantic is much more isolated than Peter Baker's news analysis column in the New York Times. That is much more of for people who are very much in a certain mindset. A lot of people are going to see this. This is going to be a huge, huge media indicator, and this is why people like Biden. This is why people. I personally don't think I've been giving Biden enough credit for how big of a move this is, and the way you can tell that is some of the reaction. It really was hard to anticipate the insaneness, the unhinged nature of the reaction that we saw in the wake of this move by Biden to pull out. It came from everywhere. It came from every corner, every single place in established media. We had the national security reporters, we had Ken Delanian, the literal CIA mouthpiece over there on MSNBC, freaking out. Everyone on CNN freaking out. Just people absolutely tearing into him over this. And these were the people who have made a lot of his political support in established circles. So it is a huge, serious, and really courageous thing, because you get the military-industrial complex, you get the media coming in, and really everyone here is against him. But he has, continued to hold strong. And it's not like it was some sort of, brave, crazy thing. It's Joe Biden. This guy has been a slave to the establishment all his life. But, at this point, I've heard this theory posited, but it took an old, doddering man who who looked the deep state in their face and said, what's my name again? Where am I? That is how he handled this situation. So, but really, kind of in a crazy, excoriating piece, and then under the guise of news analysis, this is just a straight an op-ed column from the pages of your perfect centrist, pro-liberal intervention think tank here. And this is coming from Peter Baker. This is just how this stuff gets editorialized. And you may think, New York Times, a great hub for journalism, but, there's always going to be some good people there doing some good work. But the truth of the matter is, and it comes to this, it's always like this with, mainstream media establishment outlets. When push comes to shove, when a message really needs to get out there from the deep state, from people who are really in power in this country, it will get out there. That message will get out there whether, you, I, or even Joe Biden like it or not. Anyway, let's get in a little bit more of this article. The chaos in Kabul and his own conflicting messages have left President Biden struggling to assert command over world events and seemingly more intent on washing his hands of Afghanistan than expressing concern with the humanitarian tragedy unfolding in the ground. So this is the best part, because what we have here is all this hand-wringing from people who just don't care. They don't care about Afghan women. They don't care about Afghan girls. They do not care about any of it. Otherwise, they would be just as pissed. They would be writing these hand-wringing articles about what President Biden has been doing with Saudi Arabia, because we all thought that was going to be different. Jamal Khashoggi, a liberal hero, Washington Post journalist, murdered. Trump does nothing about it. Oh, Biden does nothing about it either? Oh, okay. Forget about that. That's not a big deal. Like, it has been incredible to watch this happen, and just to watch people like some of the worst people literally in the entire world be like, the one thing that really makes me sad here is what's happening to Afghan women and girls. And how do we fix that? We go right back in. We stay right there. We get right back at it, and we need to police the frontier of what's going on here. It's just so ridiculous. And even the best part is it's not even like women's rights drastically improved when the United States government was in power. So, Afghanistan was still, last or, near the bottom in terms of outcomes for women. I thought the United States was supposed to be miracle workers. Not at all the case here. So Biden's team argues that it will not matter in the long run because Americans agree with his decision to pull out after 20 years of war and do not care what happens in Afghanistan as long as their fellow citizens are extracted safely. I think that for the most part is a correct gamble because, as long as, conservatives don't make a huge issue about refugees, I don't think this will matter in the long term. Afghanistan is America's longest war, stretching through 4 presidencies, and none of those presidents have found a way to disengage successfully. And probably the best future everyone compares this to Saigon. The truth is, Gerald Ford, it was a huge political boon getting out of Saigon for him. It was massive. So the idea that Joe Biden is, set up to struggle from this, and, it doesn't seem like he is struggling politically in the polls that have come out since. Like, it's just not really. It's a manufacturing consent, and really what it is this is what we're seeing right now is a full-on, make no mistake about it. What we're seeing right now is a full-on operation by the mainstream media to manufacture consent from this agenda and say, you know what, Joe Biden, he was wrong on this. He was not right to get these troops out of Afghanistan. They need to stay. This is a stain on his legacy because all of us, all of our Washington friends care so deeply about the rights of women and girls, and Joe Biden just doesn't. Or, I don't know, whatever point they're trying to get across there. But in the end, it's really, really quite remarkable. But, so the tumultuous endgame of Biden's withdrawal has nonetheless undercut some of his most fundamental premises of Biden's presidency. That unlike his erratic, self-absorbed predecessor, he brought foreign policy seasoning adults in the room judgment and a surfeit of empathy to the Oval Office. Again, the crazy thing here in this situation is the idea that empathy would be staying in this country any longer. And for all the people who are like, oh, we just have to wait the right time. There is no good time. There is no good time. It has been proven clear in time again because no one can convincingly put a good time. Like, it's going to happen when you lose a war, when you are defeated by another group of people. However that may happen in terms of armed conflict. It's not going to be a pretty situation. You're not going to be able to leave in the right way. So the idea that, we're just going to wait, one more year or 6 more months turns into 6 more months, and then a year, and then 2 years. And then, we could not have done this without really fully engaging with the Taliban in a way that would just led to even more conflict. In the end, that is what these people want. And they will do everything they can, including try to paint it off as humanitarian, the better option. Either way, it's really crazy. I just had the feeling he was so wrapped up in the decision itself that he forgot the basics of implementation, said Leon Panetta, who the former defense secretary serving alongside Biden in President Barack Obama's administration. The American people may be with you on the decision, but if they see chaos, they're going to be very concerned that the president doesn't have his act together. So all this is kind of like, humdrumming this situation. The president doesn't have his act together. This decision, we support it. We don't want, we were not the people in the room probably most aggressively trying to get you to not do it. We totally support it. We're behind you, Joe. Don't worry. But, the way you're doing this, it's a little awkward. David Axelrod, a former strategist from Obama strategist, said he had no doubt that most Americans agree with Biden that it was time to wrap up the Afghanistan operation. The way it's ending, at least thus far, is more problematic and cuts against some of his core perceived strengths: competence, mastery of foreign policy, supreme empathy. It's as if his eagerness to end the war overran the planning and execution. So yeah, again, I think people are really, and if this really does hold, it could be a remarkable moment of people saying, you know what? I'm trusting Grandpa Joe over all these smart guys in suits and military uniforms coming on TV and saying, this was a very irresponsible move, and the terrorists are going to succeed because of it. And that in a America that's only, 20 plus, 20 years after 9/11, that is a crazy, crazy world to be in. And I feel like if a lot of people, if you had asked that, if you had thought about that, because even some of those hard, the really tough, hardcore, anti-war people, they did not expect this to happen. Joe Biden really, really surprised a lot of people here today. Faulted earlier in the week for not consulting with allies, Biden made a point of noting that he had now called the leaders of Britain, Germany, and France. By the way, the fact that he left Boris Johnson on hold is a decision that I completely support. Boris Johnson, Joe Biden should not be given the time of day. First of all, he's Irish, and Johnson's the freaking British Prime Minister. Who cares about that? Perfect move. Germany, France, all these people are going to be, begging, whining, we need to keep the troops in. Literally in the UK today, how more sad you could be? We had Theresa May talking about what are the ways we can stay in Afghanistan without America. They cared so much. The British people, it cared so much about it that they thought it was worth staying in there without American support. That is where they are. That is how down bad some of the British politicians are out there right now. And apparently, Boris Johnson was left on hold by the White House for, his calls were not returned for 36 hours, which is something that is, in my opinion, very, very funny. So, so apparently, he was faulted in the week for not consulting with allies. Biden made a point of noting he now called the leaders of Germany, Britain, and France. Mocked for spending time at Camp David, where he'd gone for summer break while Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. Biden delayed plans to Friday afternoon to his home in Wilmington, Delaware. And again, what you're asking, think about what you're asking Americans to do. You're asking them to get all worked up for this country that, like it or not, Afghans, they have made their own decision. And it is not with this fake, corrupt government that just is, again, literally, it's incapable of getting the job done. It just cannot get the job done. Especially a lot of people, Afghanistan's an incredibly young country. A lot of the people in the country, they don't have good memories of what it was really like on the Taliban last time. And one thing is made abundantly clear by this, is that the government the United States put in has failed miserably. This guy, I think I've heard mixed reports on this, but I've heard there, of course, the Ashraf Ghani, that guy, he just dipped with $169 million of cash. This is the guy that we expected to hold off Afghanistan. And we're telling me, we didn't know something was up with this guy. Why do they deserve, why should Afghani people care about us? And again, why should American people care about Afghani people? And especially what's going on in their lives and how we should try to influence it. I mean, I really think the point of that, it's reached its logical conclusion. And the conclusion, the fact that there is a conclusion is really, I think, the most incredible thing of all here.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our segment to tell you all about what's going on here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network this summer. We do, as I'm sure you know, have a great lineup available for you. We, of course, start with our flagship show, Newsflash, all new Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Uncultured, irregularly, back every Saturday with live music and sports analysis with my co-host for the summer, Bennett Laxton. Hidden History will be brand new every Thursday on a bit of a hiatus, but will return shortly. It's the summer of podcasting. It's the summer of sounds. All you got to do is just keep listening wherever you get your podcasts, always here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.
All right, yeah, so we are talking to, we're going through this interview here in Jacobin today with Mike Prysner. He's been an Iraq vet. He was an Iraq war veteran. He was an anti-war activist for 15. He has been an anti-war activist for 15 years. He talked to Megan Day in Jacobin, and he's been arrested demonstrating outside the building, the Capitol building, helping active duty soldiers refuse orders to fight in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and organizing grieving families who've lost enlisted or veteran loved ones to wars or suicide. So Prysner founded the organization March Forward in 2008. Today he's an anti-war journalist, having co-written and produced multiple documentaries for the program The Empire Files, hosted by his wonderful wife. I'm a big fan of Abby Martin. He's also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And what he had to say about some of this stuff was very, very interesting. He talks about, the question was 4 presidents have now presided over this war: George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Trump, and Biden, talking about each of their administrations. So he says the Bush administration's motivation in starting a war in Afghanistan was not to prevent another terrorist attack, which, of course, would not have been accomplished by invading and occupying a country that had no role in 9/11, which, of course, nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about, this clear double standard between Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, and people being so concerned about what happens in Afghanistan. But and again, this is a bipartisan situation on both sides, willing to cut the Saudis in a break, all because of a deal that we made back in the 1930s that we are so, dependent on them for their oil. That's the only way they can explain it. If they butchered do you think the Taliban would be able to get away with it doing that? That is Taliban-esque behavior, butchering a journalist, an American journalist, but we do nothing. We don't think about sanction. We don't think about any sort of punishment. We don't even we continue to work with the freaking Crown Prince, and he just, has to take a 2-year hiatus, go hide in one of his castles, and come right back out. So, in fact, a survey conducted about 10 years ago showed that 92% of young Afghan men had occupied in the southern provinces had never even heard of the 9/11 attacks, which is pretty crazy. This is in the Taliban. Meanwhile, the Taliban had offered to cooperate with the U.S. in catching Osama bin Laden and other counterterrorism efforts, but this offer was ignored. That's another thing that gets no coverage because, of course, this is a pro-war, pro-military media. The reasons the United States went into Afghanistan is that while the Taliban were willing to cooperate with the U.S., they were difficult to deal with because they were not behaving like a neo-colony. Any country that's not a totally subservient client, even if it's willing to collaborate in some way with imperialism, is on the list for overthrow and destruction. The Bush administration thought it would be easy. They thought we'd just go into Afghanistan and take a month to overthrow the Taliban government and we'll install a puppet government. Then we'll move on to Iraq and it'll be really easy, and we'll do Iran the same, and then we'll move on to Lebanon, Somalia, and Sudan. The Pentagon really thought it would overthrow all these countries in a period of 5 years. They really thought that. They didn't think they would get bogged down in a quagmire. It was a complete imperial arrogance that led Bush and his administration and the Pentagon at the time to think it would be an easy road. When these wars blew up in their faces, that's when Obama came in. That sounds about right. Obama's statement that he was going to end the Iraq war was really what propelled him through the Democratic primary in 2008, tapping into the anger and hostility about the war at that time. But he also promised to win the Afghanistan war, not withdraw, but win. That's why you got the Obama surge in Afghanistan. Really, this is when the point where we see these two wars begin to separate. When they're always kind of separated, but when Obama comes in and really makes that distinction, saying, you know what, we are going to make this push in Afghanistan because it's right for some reason. It's really so ridiculous and transparent, because what we're seeing here is this time the Iraq war has pretty much already come to a close in terms of the real important stuff going on, and the U.S. military, they need their next big thing, and I think really that's the big reason why they have to keep it alive, because they need their next big thing. That's just how it has to happen. So Obama flooded the country with troops to try and exert enough pressure on the Taliban to get them to accept a deal. if you look back at the Afghanistan papers, the Obama administration and the Pentagon by that time never really believed they could defeat the Taliban militarily. At that point, they believed that they just give them enough of a beating, they would accept a power-sharing deal, and they were doing secret talks with the Taliban to that extent. So while the public was being told the United States was making progress in Afghanistan, and soldiers and their families were being told, we just have to keep fighting, we have to keep dying, we have to keep killing for just a few more years until we defeat the Taliban, behind the scenes, they were trying to negotiate a Taliban government, only with U.S. puppet forces having some kind of role. The Obama troop surge was a disaster on the ground, just a complete failure militarily. In the Afghan papers, you can see the Pentagon was saying to the Obama administration, by every metric, we're losing this war and cannot turn around. Well, the White House responded, create a metric that shows we're doing good. There was growing hostility to the war strategy from within the ranks of the military. High-ranking enlisted people were speaking out about soldiers being put on pointless patrols where every single day someone was getting their legs blown off. There was a lot of discontent inside the military, and it started to look bad for the United States. So the end cap of the Obama strategy was basically, okay, so we're going to slowly retreat. We're just going to kind of slink our way out of here. When Trump came in, he inherited a small number of troops on the ground. Withdrawal was already set up, and he could have continued the same pace and gotten out of the war like he campaigned on. He ripped Republicans and Democrats for keeping us in the forever war. He loved, obviously, that rhetoric until he was in a position to do that. What Trump did instead was triple the number of U.S. troops in the country. He pressured other NATO countries to add more troops, vastly expanding the number of mercenaries to the point there were roughly 10 times as many mercenaries as there was soldiers. His bombing escalation was one of the grotesque hallmarks of his presidency, and the CIA and the military already faced little restriction when it came to dropping bombs, killing civilians on a regular basis, but Trump really came in there and said, gloves off. So those were some of Trump's biggest contributions, the bombs, the civilians just getting killed, and really empowering and loosening and really brutalizing a lot of this war that we see today. But Biden coming in and ending this war, still not, the anti-imperialist, Bernie Sanders person that, we would have all loved and hoped for, but it is a hugely courageous and hugely significant thing to do. Just look at, there just has been no other president who just provoked that kind of really ferocious uproar that we've seen over the past few weeks really the past week, from Biden pulling out of this, like in just terms of a decision that affected so many people, so many powerful people, and Biden sticking through with it. So big credit to him on that. We'll take a look at some of the craziest media reactions in 20 seconds.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's Newsflash.
Some people may think this is weird, but I kind of like that one. Anyway, Americans, they are reacting, of course, to our pulling out of the Afghan war. You could be forgiving for assuming from the tenor of much of the media coverage this week that everyone thinks the Afghan war was, a noble humanitarian effort that was built on, complete, I don't even know what the word is. It was built on nobility. It was built on, righteous imperialism, liberal interventionism. Whatever those words mean. So pretty much this is in the, Discourse blog here. The airwaves have been flooded with a pretty much a string of seemingly unending string of military men, hawkish politicians, and journalists determined to cement a narrative of good war undone by bad decisions at the top. Reporters have angrily wondered why the White House wasn't contemplating a presumably indefinite military presence in Afghanistan, and even in the countries surrounding Afghanistan. Surely these people must be representing a constituency besides, themselves? Well, perhaps not. A poll found out today that from the Associated Press, and it tells quite a different story. A significant majority of Americans doubt that the war in Afghanistan was worthwhile, even as the U.S. is more divided than ever over President Joe Biden's handling of foreign policy and national security, according to a poll from the Associated Press. Roughly two-thirds of this said they think that, Afghan war, not worth fighting. The finding is consistent with other polls, asking specifically about the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Voters were favored in the Data for Progress poll, they favored it by 51 to 37 margin. Morning Consult found about the same, 49 to 37. So it seems like there's this hardcore base of support that, maybe probably mostly Republicans reacting to this in a, just seeing these, great Republican thought leaders attacking Biden and just going from there. But this is, as we see through the polls, a very clear popular war. So it really is quite remarkable. That number, the Morning Consult noted, represents a very steep drop, a full 20 points from the last time it would be asked in April, but that's not especially surprising given the chaos and tragedy playing out in Afghanistan at the moment, and conclude that something had gone awry, even if you still supported the move. But it is really significant that even with the relentless drumbeat of negative news, media coverage, and partisan attacks, most Americans still want to get out of the war in Afghanistan, and the vast majority of them think the war wasn't worth it, which very clearly was not. I think we all know that. It's been very clear. So CNN also had a funny one with that. It's Jim Sciutto had a little bit of a crisis moment with his son about this. We'll play you the audio. It's a little bit funny. Let's see here. Actually, you know what? We're unfortunately unable to play that for you. Let's see. You know what? Actually,
my son asked me yesterday if the U.S. won or lost the war there, and I realized as I answered, it's far from clear. In a long and deadly campaign in which some 2,400 U.S. service members gave their lives, the U.S. greatly diminished al-Qaeda. A senior administration official told me yesterday that for now, al-Qaeda does not have the capability to attack the U.S. homeland. But the Taliban outlasted us, just as they said they would all along. And many among the Afghan people and in its government feel the U.S. has left them out in the cold. So many of our country's promises of a functioning democratic government, a more varied and less impoverished economy, and peace, which I heard personally hundreds of times in dozens of trips to Afghanistan from countless U.S. officials and military commanders, sadly failed to materialize. Now, we can leave, and they, of course, cannot. At a minimum, our country is leaving after 20 years with less than we hoped for or promised. And
what is that called? What is that called? That's called an L. And really, honestly, I think some of the most important thing about one of the most important things about this is coming to that conclusion. And the answer is, how do we do that? It's natural, and it's bound to happen because we are an empire in decline. There's no denying that. We were coming from a point that was higher than we are now. We had a lot of control over a lot more of the economy. Things went our way a lot easier. There's no denying that. And there's no denying Western imperialist power took a great fat L, when during this Afghanistan pullout. They were brought down, and of course the question is, how are you brought down? What is the thought process? What is the reaction? What decision does your country take? What decision does the voters take? How is it processed in the culture? I think that is incredibly, incredibly important, and a big, big reason why Joe Biden was probably one of the few presidents that could do this, because he is one of those people who, I don't know really in his heart of hearts what he believes, but he's the person, just given to his political situation. It's not like, they can threaten him with too much, like, a Kamala Harris might have been able to be manipulated by. So, someone like a Democratic donor could come up to Kamala and or Pete or any of those people and be like, be careful what you wish for. You may not, you may be in a bit of trouble if you try to really go ahead with this thing. But not so for Joe. And, just someone who has had, someone's had a lot of things happen to him, understands what it's like to not, have to win all the time, not embodying that insane, hopeless, and oftentimes incredibly destructive and murderous optimism that we see in America. That has been, slowly kind of stamped out. And just to see that happen is really, it's a remarkable change of tone, just change of pace in American culture. And it really just shows you it was a lot further along than what we thought. Like things were going, things were progressing, and it is, yeah. I think there's no way to say it. No other way to say it, that it was definitely a loss. So you kind of think that the viewpoint would be more represented within the upper echelons of our elite media. The idea that this may kind of this is kind of not worth it, guys. It's a little bit embarrassing. But our biggest journalists are really operating in a world of their own. What's worse, there are reports that the widespread view that the war in Afghanistan was fundamentally wrong is deliberately being excluded from the mainstream debates. This is Judd Legum. He is a journalist, or Legum, from Media Matters. He has his own little Substack. He writes on that little Substack of his, quote, "I've been in political media for over 2 decades." This is a veteran communications professional who he talked to, saying, "I've been in political media for over 2 decades, and I've never experienced something like this before. Not only can I get people booked on shows, but I can't even get TV bookers who frequently book my guests to give me a call back. I've had sources, reporters who end up not quoting the sources, but do quote multiple voices who are critical of the president and or put the withdrawal in a negative light. I turn on the TV and watch CNN and frankly a lot of MSNBC shows, and they're presenting it as if there's not a voice out there willing to defend the president. And one of the biggest, most effective tools mainstream media propagandists have is what they're not willing to show you, what they're not willing to put on the airwaves." And he says, "I offered those shows those voices, but those shows have purposely decided to shut those voices out. This is scandalous on its face, but it should also trouble anyone who laments the lack of trust that the Americans have in their media. Why should people put their faith in an industry that is so blatantly insulated within its own universe? Why should people support elite media figures who work so hard to continue a war that almost nobody wants them to carry on? When people like Brian Stelter, all these people who are, concerned about, the lack of faith that we have in our institutions and are so dead set on blaming conspiracy theories. A little bit of thought for all you guys out there. Why don't you take a look in? Why don't you take a look at the fact that people like CNN's a great example. The thing they just did with Cuomo, where they completely used their top-rated guy, who happens to be the governor's brother, to help him get out of a huge political situation that he didn't even end up getting out of anyway, which is even better. But then you have some situation with Afghanistan, completely poorly covered. Pundits up the wazoo being like, this is, if you support this, if you even thought about supporting this war, you don't like Afghan women and girls. Like, it is ridiculous to see the, absolute vacuum of coverage. And this is how it happens. Like, this is when the message needs to get out, it will get out, no matter the cost, no matter who is silenced, it's going to happen. And the question is, how do people react? And that's, I think, good. This is going to be another really kind of damaging moment in terms of credibility for the media, because it's going to be another instance of them attacking and trying to, tell people something that they know is not true, and that people generally just don't respond well to that, especially when it's people in rich kind of ivory towers, out of touch, doing that. And people wanted out of this war, and if they're told these crazy things by these discredited people, it's not going to help them gain more accreditation. All right, let's move now to the AP. A federal appeals court on Friday said a pause in evictions designed to curb the spread of the coronavirus can remain in place for now, sending up a battle before the nation's highest court. A big win for Biden. The idea that, this is going to be struck down the moment it gets back in the court. It shows a huge win for Cory Bush and a huge win for Joe Biden, showing that, this policy that would not have happened without, Cory getting those two old folks, Pelosi and Biden, out of their diapers, their adult diapers, and into the legislating room for the day. Get them a little bit occupied with the busy box of keeping Americans out of homelessness and poverty and possibly death, with the Delta variant surging. To me, this is the fact that this is approved. This is another perfect example for all of them. I think for Biden and for Cori Bush, it says, like, this is what you can do. This is what you can do when you actually challenge the power, when you actually, give those rules a little bit of a tug and put a little bit of pressure on our institutions like our Republicans have been doing since, forever, and getting their way, been bending our institutions to their will, some of the most powerful institutions that actually have material effects over people's lives. Those have been bended to the will by the Republican Party so effectively, and without little pushback and tons of mainstream media handling like, oh, it's going to be the time that our democracy fails. No, our democracy doesn't fail. I don't think we've ever really had a very strong democracy, but that's another conversation. Our country continues on, and they continue to make massive gains in power, and nothing seems to be done about it by the other side. And this kind of move, just pushing past the Supreme Court will be interesting to see. Or pushing past, what the Supreme Court may have said in the past, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Of course, it will go to the Supreme Court again. They voted 5-4 in June to allow the moratorium to continue through the end of July, but Justice Kavanaugh, who joined the majority on that decision, warned the administration not to act further without explicit congressional approval. So Congress never gave CDC this staggering amount of power. It claims that is what Supreme Court landlord attorneys were telling the Supreme Court on Friday, so this case is going to the Supreme Court for sure. As of August 2nd, roughly 3.5 million people in the United States said they faced eviction in the next 2 months, according to the Census Bureau's Household Pulse survey. The new moratorium temporarily holds evictions in counties with substantial and high levels of virus transmission. That would cover areas of where 90% of the U.S. population lives. So it's a pretty effective eviction moratorium. We'll keep you posted on how it does in the future when it goes to the Supreme Court and other courts. All right, that's all the time we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Newsflash.